Now we'll open the floor to your questions. Please state your name and your outlet and who the question is for. We'll go over to Kai.
Kai Küstner, ARD German Radio. You kind of rushed through a little bit the possible challenges or threats you could address in this exercise: terrorism, autocratic state leaders. Can you be a bit more specific and also tell us if hybrid warfare is going to be one of the challenges you will want to address? And one further question, if I may. You mentioned the NGOs. Can you already give us some names of NGOs that will be present?
So, of course, you'd forgive us if some aspects of what will be played out in the exercise are not completely in the public domain right now, because there has to be an element of training and exercise and everything else. Some of that is a departure into the unknown for the troops taking part. But the exercise will reflect the world as we see it today and the conditions that we can see in the near future. And on the scope and scale and complexity that we're looking at here, the scenario has been built over years, as I said, to include almost every single evolution you can imagine out there. And from that evolution over the past year and a half or so, sort of storylines have been developed, challenges directly related to how we want the troops to be exercised and tested and evaluated in the current conditions. So you're right, I touched on a couple of things, terrorism, subversion, that sort of instability in a brewing crisis. And of course, that's shorthand for a whole range of things. That will obviously escalate, requiring the application of 36,000 plus troops. I mentioned the fact that we'll be looking at testing and evaluating new concepts and new methods of operation around cyber, missile defense, interconnected communication networks that General Domröse referred to, and so on and so forth. So there'll be a huge wide spectrum of challenges for the troops at every level, not just in terms of military maneuver, but also in terms of how you nuance the security presence with other security actors and the civil domain and sovereign governments and their requirements and everything else. Hybridity, yes. I mean, we run something like 200 exercises a year in NATO right now at various different levels. And this sense of hybridity and ambiguity and this sense of crises evolving out of instability is present in our training right now. This isn't something that's necessarily particularly novel in that sense. How we deal with it in the current context is something that we're very much focusing on. And of course that speaks very much to the sort of thoughts that General Domröse was outlining around interaction with the EU and civil actors and everything else.
Yeah, if I may add, thank you, Phil. Terrorism, for example, there are mines, we call it IED, explosives planted somewhere on the road in a village. They threaten the population. We know it. Now the question is, who plants those bloody mines? Who is responsible? So we are trying to get into the network. It is not the poor man who plants it. It is somebody with a white collar who dictates, you go and plant. So, in other words, we play this. And the key to terrorism is obviously intel-driven operations. And we've got to learn intel-driven operations. So you do not simply fight against something. You have to have a plan. And if you want to fight a network, you better do it within a network. So that is modern warfare. It is not tank moving to a tank. That is easy. As I said, we can do this 24/7, everywhere. Easy. More complicated is network operations, intel-driven operations. And for example, very easy to understand, if you want to have intel-driven operations, you need highly sophisticated modern equipment. So in other words, if you don't see anything, you are blind, and then it's complicated. But if you have something in the air, you see something, you look to the horizon, and you see everything, then you can distinguish between the good man and the bad man. And nobody talked about SOF, my friends, special operations. They are always on, very skilled, very agile young men and women, and they have ears on the ground. They hear a lot. So that is a sensor, if you will. It is not only flying material. It is sensors, human sensors. They live in the country. They live within the villages. They know what's going on, and they know that is a good man. This person is, I'm not sure, but this is a dark man. So, intel-driven operations. Hybrid warfare, cyber was mentioned, yes. But also, may I take your wonderful invitation to hashtag TJ15. Yes, we will also play media, obviously. We will play social engagement, social media, hashtag something, and we will challenge our staff by propaganda. So what is true, what is not true? Pictures manipulated. So where's the truth? So we will have to follow hashtag things, media, television, and others, and then in the end the staff will very much challenge and try to find out what is right, what is wrong, and how can we react. Certainly we will not use propaganda, we will always tell the truth. And other things. NGOs, I must apologize. We have more than a dozen NGOs. There are a few amongst them who said we are eager to participate, but please do not mention my name. And I respect this. So if an NGO, if you come and visit us, is there and he wants to say, yes, I am from German Deutscher Rote Kreuz, it's his business. But it is not my call to say. I stick to my bigger friends like the EU, like the ICRC, human rights, USAID, the smaller ones. They want to announce it themselves, and I very much appreciate. Thank you.
Okay, I've got about 4 questions. I've got Brooks, Julian, Daniel, Jan. Okay, so we'll start with Brooks.
Thanks. Yes, Brooks, Tigner, Jane's Defense. One of the key Wales tasks was to make the NRF more flexible and particularly faster to deploy. I'm just wondering, leaving aside the exercise itself, will you be tracking how quickly the Allies can get to the Trident theater itself? Because that would offer some interesting metrics about what how quickly they're able to deploy. And then within the exercise itself, will you be specifically challenging the players' ability to deploy from a non-readiness status on certain vignettes?
Yeah, thank you. You mentioned the IRF. That is the past. In the future, we talk about the VJTF. It's a new name, but it is a change in quality. Now, I think it is kind of open secret that the VJTF should be available within a few days. So let's assume that a few days is less than a week. So then technically we would always have something that says go, then the scouts go, then the bulk of the forces, and then the other forces. So within a few days, fine. That is fast. That is fast. And one should, I'm talking about the land heavy brigade element. I'm not talking about aircraft. I'm traveling a lot within my area in Europe. And I can tell you, from Brussels, it's always 2 hours. So we should never underestimate the power and the speed of air power. So we have always aircraft available. Always. We have designated aircraft in the Baltic arena. In other words, we call it air policing. They are there 24/7, 365 days. Then we have national assets available. And then we have the NRF portion available, and they can fly within hours. Now, the real thing is twofold. First, our political leadership will have to take a decision within a few days. Without a political decision, I will not march. Second, we can only get a political decision if we have indications and warnings. No indication and warnings, no movement. So, assuming that we have indication and warnings, then the Supreme Allied Commander, General Phil Breedlove, will go to the NAC, our political body, will seek advice, or he will say, this is serious, I want you to set free the VJTF. Then they say yes or no, very simple. And then the section says yes, with the team, of course, and then they go within a few days, then they are deployed. And we can do. if that was your question.
My question was, are you going to track how quickly the Allies can get their assets to the Trident battlefield? Just to measure what the metrics are.
No, we don't do this. Nations deploy on their national plans. But we did test bedding. I know exactly that a transport ship from Lisbon to Lithuania, fully loaded, takes 4 days. To load it, to sail it, to unload it, if you wanted one ship. But there are bigger ships traveling faster, so.
So let me just comment on that. We've got a couple of the young architects of the NATO exercise regime sitting in the back of the room, and Chris Hahn back there, who I'll name check, is our young US Navy aviator who runs an awful lot of the architecture for these exercises. And as I said, we run about 200 of these. This happens to be a pretty big one, and it's been long planned to be a pretty big one, and we'll do pretty big ones pretty periodically. There are other big ones. And so that sense of readiness and evaluation is something we do month in, month out with various components. That sense of the completeness of the staff, their training readiness to be ready for what they do, their sort of training standards and everything else, the deployability. That training regime has a logic to it that runs throughout the year, has a rhythm to it that runs over a couple of years, that attends to all of those questions of testing out the deployability, making sure the nations have put the right bits and pieces in place for their forces, making sure the staff and the communications and everything else plugs together. And every single dimension of that, we have test and evaluation and experimentation throughout the day. And at the end of that sort of process, or periodically during the process, you have sort of semi-formal evaluations where senior commanders such as Domröse can stand there with a sense of science and art together to say this military force can do what it wants to do. Now, it's not a driving component of this exercise, this particular exercise, to drive those metrics, but we have those in other dimensions.
I should say, I can assure you that this Spanish-led VJTF for my team in 16 will be tested on deployability. But I can't tell you the date because my Spanish then would prepare. So be assured they will be tested and they will move within Europe. But apart from this exercise, this is a special focus is on deployability.
I'm sure everybody knows what the VJTF is, the Very High Readiness Joint Task Force, but just in case, also known as the Spearhead Force. We'll go to the Julian in the third row, then we'll take Jan and John, and I know there are, and Daniel in the back.
Thanks, Julian Barnes, Wall Street Journal. Why invite the Russians as observers? And is there a risk of, if there are weaknesses in the response force, that you will be showcasing them to the Russians?
Yeah, thank you. A very simple answer it would be that we are members of these treaties. So we have open skies, we have exercise limitations, or we say if a certain number of participants is overseeded, we announce it. It is like our DNA. It is the treaty regime, and we follow this regime, and I have no problem with it. Secondly, they will watch us anyhow, invited or not. We are talking about a modern nation, whether you accept it or not. They have satellites also. So it's not so that Russia doesn't see anything. So they are, according to the regimes we all signed, and we are loyal to our treaties. We fulfill our treaties. They can come. And they will listen uninvited, I don't know. I was just recently with my maritime forces on HMS Ocean in the Baltic Sea, and guess who flew over our bridge? A Russian aircraft. It's open sky. They can do, and they accompanied us with their ships. It's fine. That's easy for us. And with regards to whether they see the difference between good or better, I'll leave it up to them. But they will be hopefully impressed.
Of course, we have the absolute humility to acknowledge the fact that observers will observe weaknesses, but let's not also lose the sense that this has been a great demonstration of alliance solidarity. And the fact that this exercise has grown somewhat exponentially in the wake of the annexation of Crimea, and the proxy war in Ukraine and the like, is testament to the nation's sense of really wanting to make sure that this is assurance and deterrence in action. This happens to be an out-of-area exercise, not Article 5 collective defence exercise. But we're very proud of the fact that the nations have come together at some strength, at some magnitude, with the cutting-edge capabilities to demonstrate this sense of resolve in the face of multiple security challenges. So that sort of demonstration to anyone who happens to be there is something that we warmly welcome.
Let me just add that, of course, our member states are parties to the Vienna document, the OSCE document, and as such, there is a requirement to notify exercises that go above a certain threshold within a certain amount of days, and to invite observers from all the 56 OSCE member states. And that is exactly what we are doing. Because what we do is defensive, it's transparent, and it is in line with our international obligations. Daniel, just behind, fourth row.
Daniel Brössler, Süddeutsche Zeitung. The fact that this exercise is taking place in southern Europe, is that a hint that this is not only about the threat from the east, from Russia, or does geography, does it not play a role here at all, and it doesn't play a role where it takes place? And of course, is it a hint that it's turning to the threat from the south as well?
Yeah, thank you for your interesting question. We know that we have two threats, the so-called eastern threat and the southern threat. But this exercise is a non-Article 5 exercise. As General Jones pointed out, it is an artificial, fictive scenario taking place in Sorotan, which is kind of parts of Africa. So it has nothing to do with the eastern threat. But in a threat scenario, there are different actors, terrorists, there are ordinary forces, there are special forces, there are air forces, there are nations, there are NGOs, there are IOs, parliaments, and so on. It is a kind of real world playing in South Africa. Certainly it acknowledges that we have to be prepared, the NF in particular, prepared to be agile and able to respond to any threat. So any means, in this case, a southern threat or an eastern threat. And we have to train both. So in this regard, you can say, yes, we are also concentrating from time to time our efforts to counter a southern threat.
Yeah, and of course, as the General said, both the NATO response force and the spearhead force, which is the core of it, have to be ready to deploy to deal with threats from any direction, whether from the east or from the south. And that's exactly what they are doing, and that's what they're training for. John, first row, please. Oh, you've got the microphone.
I do, thank you. John Dahlberg from the Associated Press. Let's see, General Jones, you talked about this exercise being upgraded somewhat exponentially since the Crimea crisis. I wonder, can you tell us how it's been, you or General Domröse, can you tell us how it's been changed or modified to deal with the new challenges that have surfaced to NATO since the Ukraine crisis, and also since Islamic State has surfaced on the radar? I also wanted to ask for some more details about what is different in this exercise from the last major exercise that took place in Norway in 2002. I understand you'll be dealing with IEDs, a dictator, propaganda on the internet. Can you sum up some of the other? Can you explain some of the other novelties? And a couple, finally, simple questions. Could you explain what Trident Juncture means? I'm also not sure if I understood the name of this fictitious country. Is it NATO spelled backwards? So OTAN?
So OTAN is the French name for NATO.
Right, that's what I understood.
ZO is ZO.
ZO and then NATO, or ZO and then OTAN? And I think that my final question is for Oana. Many of my bureaus, and I'm sure those of my colleagues in Spain and Portugal and Italy, are very interested in this exercise and are pressing me for details. When will we know, for example, what sort of TV access we have, what sort of access photographers will have, and so forth? Thank you.
I'll pick up a couple of those and then pass them over. Let's start with we military. We were talking about this just before we come in here, actually. We sometimes trip over ourselves with our exercise names and our naming conventions. And our nations sometimes do it differently. The Trident Juncture is a standing exercise naming convention for NATO for a series of exercises, which are the top-level NRF certification exercises. It really has very little rationale other than the T comes from our exercise leadership of transformation, the J is joint. And we were discussing beforehand, this are the pros and cons of trying to name our exercises more effectively for the information domain that we live in. We've gone to great lengths to sanitize them in many respects such that they don't apply anything. And there are other naming conventions out there and everything else. And if Oana has a way, we will change our approach to exercise names because we trip over ourselves. So what has changed since Ukraine and the crisis in the Middle East around Daesh, ISIS, ISIL? Well, this exercise was part of NATO's building block for the post-Afghanistan recalibration as part of our planning from some time ago. And so the framework, the architecture, has been in place for some time. It predates the annexation of Crimea, and it predates the current evolutions in Iraq and Syria there. But of course, the team of people, of experts who work and develop and nurture this, the challenge for us is to make sure that we as a military, we're never fighting the last war, but that last war was 10 years ago or 10 minutes ago. So internally to the exercise, the scenario has been continually refreshed, updated, and the challenge to keep pace of the sort of demands that people like General Domröse want to play on the training system are huge these days to make sure it's relevant in the information domain, in the social media, political domain, and things like that. So there's a lot that's going on there. What's new from 2002? I'm afraid I was in Kabul in 2002, so I'd have to defer to others.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So social media was one thing, cyber is the other thing. In 2002 it was unknown. But let me focus on three elements of particular interest for me. Sorry, please. Yeah. Let me focus on three elements only that are of particular interest to me. First, distance. It's a huge training area. From Portugal to Italy, and the seas in between the Mediterranean and the Atlantic. And I don't say where the Atlantic stops, so obviously Atlantic. So that is distance is new since then. And all the other ones were in a training area. This is really huge for a European. For Americans it's nice, but for us it's huge, the area. Secondly, we will focus on speed. So the question of deployability is a separate issue, and you can trust me, it will come. But speed matters, I'm convinced. Speed matters. So we will have speed, and you will see it in the air, at sea, and on land. And the third thing is multiple events in this huge training area happens simultaneously. So it is not one thing after the other, next day, victory, and then it is a rolling thing that every now and then everything pops up. So it is real world. And we have transformed some recent examples that will now happen in Zoltan. So we will see that airports are heavily fought for, the ones who want to defend an airport or the ones who want to take it. And we noticed that artillery has a certain role to play in certain areas, but we play it now in Zoltan. I mentioned the IED threat and others such as propaganda. And let me also highlight 4 brigades, fully blown up brigades, Marine Corps coming in and out, amphibious operations, not only one, several amphibious operations together, which is a real challenge for an operational commander because you have now the maritime forces, the land forces coming from the ships, taking ownership on land, the land forces, then the air cover. If you don't have air cover, amphibious operation will fail. So this is a very complex scenario, and we have this simultaneously in some areas. We will also test and train how to gain air superiority. Since Afghanistan and Bosnia, we think we have air superiority, and we are very proud. Yes, we have. But I challenge them in areas where they have not granted air superiority, where they have to fight for air superiority, how to gain it. The same is true for freedom of navigation. I will have an area where there will be a fight for freedom of navigation, where the control of the sea is not given. And then we see how our maritime forces will get it, hopefully. If they don't, then they're not good enough. So there are new challenges, complex, very fast, and it will be really challenging. But in the end, I'm convinced that our commanders are agile, forward-leading, and they will have good ideas to win, to set the conditions militarily for the peaceful development, and that is what we are aiming at.
Okay, let me just spell out Sorotan for you, and it's S-O-R-O-T-A-N. So this is a fictitious scenario which actually predates this exercise. So Sorotan, I suppose you could also. Yes. So that's the first question.
You can read it from NATO.
Totally fictitious. Second question, and our good colleague Martin Klein, who's in the front row, you'll see lots more of him, I'm sure, if you'll cover this exercise, who's the Chief Public Affairs Officer for Brunssum. He will release a detailed news release immediately at the end of this briefing, to which of course we will link to on our website. But I can already give you a sneak preview, if I may, Martin. So I can tell you that there will be we expect we'll have 3 distinguished visitors days in Trapani, Italy, in Zaragoza, in Spain, and in Troia, in Portugal. Obviously, details will be finalized as we come closer to the date. But the main thing that I think you need to know is that there will be a NATO Exercise Media Information Center, which will be established in Zaragoza, in Spain, from the 29th of September until the 8th of November this year. So we're going to be there for quite some time. And of course, you'll have in this press release, you'll have all the details about accreditation, the documents you need, and then obviously, as we come closer to the date, we will provide more information. Okay, I had Jan waiting patiently.
Thank you. Jan Cordis from Agence Europe. 2 small questions, one on cyber defense. Are you going to test the cyber offensive capabilities of the allies? The second question on AGS. Since the first Global Hawk is already built, are you going to use the AGS system? And the last question, I wonder why did you choose an out-of-area non-Article 5 scenario? Since the readiness action plan is all about to shape the NATO posture to answer threats on its territory. I mean, for example, the VGTF concept was created to move quickly a force inside Europe. That's the reason to create the Nephews, to have the predisposition of equipment. It's not an old way expeditionary force normally. Thank you.
I can start, and then we try how to do the cyber offensive. No. We will strictly defend. I have no authority to go offensive. But when you leave this room and you will discover your smartphone is empty, then it was me. Okay, but I won't do this. So it's just a joke. We will use Global Hawk, and we will use modern equipment if available. It is up to the nation to provide this for the exercise, but I'm very optimistic that bigger nations will provide this tool timely, not the 6 weeks Oana mentioned, but from time to time when required, when we do, let's say, complicated operations, complex operations, we will have support from kind of Global Hawk, whatever they are called. Different nations have different assets, but we will have those elements. Now the VJTF and Article 5, that is a thing, I couldn't read this, honestly. The NRF, and we are talking about enhanced NRF, you mentioned IRF and I mentioned VJTF. There's a whole bunch of rewording. It is more agile, it is quicker, faster, and more capable, but it is designed to counter any threat to NATO or to allied members. So it is, as I said, for our political masters, extremely difficult to keep the crowd together for the eastern and the southern threat. So no one has written, as far as I am concerned, so then I have to apologize. I have not seen anything that says the VJTF is exclusively for the eastern threat. It may very well be better suited for the eastern threat, because here we are talking about tanks, aircrafts and ships, cyber and green man, more traditional threat, whereas in the south we talk about terrorists and other things. So you would not necessarily need a tank battalion, but helicopters, for example, you need in both scenarios, or infantry to protect people in both scenarios. So I would not exclude that the NRF as such, then tailored according to indication and warnings, tailored to that mission, but we have to prepare it for both possible missions.
May I just remind you, Jan, that the NATO response force has already been deployed in crisis management operations, for instance, to help out with Hurricane Katrina, the Pakistan earthquake, indeed the Greek Olympics. So there's been a wide range of situations in which the NRF has already been deployed. Therefore, it remains ready to deploy to deal with any type of contingency.
No, that was the point I was going to make.
Okay, thank you. Gérard.
Yes, Gérard Gaudin, Belgian News Agency. I have a very basic question. Is Trident Juncture going to be something else than a certification exercise for the NRF 16? Or are you going to introduce new things?
Yeah, thank you very much for this question. I should not say this publicly, but the NRF force is not as strong as the exercise force. So obviously the exercise is attractive for nations. You heard the numbers of nations, allied to 27, 7 partners, and so on, and IOs. So this is an opportunity for member states and others, for friends in the broader sense, to come together, train together, and foster and develop and deepen interoperability. So it is the core force I am responsible for to train and make it agile and ready and prepared is the NRF, which is only a part. Luckily, there are so many others who wanted to participate. And you could say this: nations participate without being a member of NRF because they will get something they can't get at home. They get more for the bang. For example, if you send a company from Lithuania, which is expensive training costs, to Spain in this case, in our scenarios, together with all the other nations, you will never have the opportunity to train with so many allies and partners together. And this is quite something. So it is a kind of pool where you plug in and say, well, you will never have this again. Never again. And that's why it is attractive. It is also kind of worthwhile, because we are spending our money, we try to spend our money smart, not to waste money. And here you have air, maritime, and land forces, special forces, together in a certain time frame, in a certain arena that is simply beautiful. You can't get it at home.
Hello, my name is Mark from Associated Press Television. The Mediterranean has been filled with, for the last few years, of ships full of migrants fleeing war-torn countries that obviously are not going to receive your, public media campaign warning that this is happening. What are you doing to make sure that they don't all of a sudden sail into a live exercise zone in the Mediterranean?
That is one of the easier parts. We will ensure this. The other question, what is behind this? So we can assure that those two entities will not interfere each other. But what do I do when we come across a humanitarian crisis at sea? The simple answer is, we will, with this very ship who comes across this disaster, they will stop the exercise, will help, will give humanitarian help, will sail those people wherever to, will save lives, and then returns to the exercise in strong coordination with the nation, because I do not own the ship. I do not own anything except this pencil. But the nations own ships. So if there is a humanitarian crisis on the water in the vicinity of a German frigate, I would call the German and say, could we do this? And they would say, yes, we love to do this. And other nations. So I assume that is not the problem. We have more than 60 ships, but we have a training purpose, and the humanitarian crisis is being well taken care of by the EU, if I read the newspapers correctly. So, but we will not let somebody die if we could help. Very clear.
Yeah, there is, of course, an international obligations for all captains of all ships, whether they are part under EU or NATO or national flag, and that would take over, basically, in coordination with the respective nation and with the exercise commander. I think we've exhausted all your questions. Thank you very much. You'll have everything on the website, and of course, we look forward to seeing you this autumn for Trident Juncture 2015. Many thanks.
Thank you very much.